hopefully Roger will attend. He's around, I know, because I saw some email and Twitter from him. So Roger MacNicol, who actually was one of the primary developers for external tables. Hopefully he'll be there or join us. My name is Andy Rivenes. Excuse me. I'm a product manager with Database and Memory, and welcome to our Database and Memory AskTOM Office Hours sessions, where we're going to talk about external tables and some of the new features that have been added in 21C. We'll do some demos and anyways, our landing page, which you would have used to join the session today, just like to remind folks that we do have our previous office hours sessions, and we've actually done quite a few of them now. So you can click on those and view those. In addition, we have our resources. I've got a list, our blog and our resources page on the blog, which has lots of information about database and memory. Our Live Labs environment, in-memory advisor, if you want to look and see if maybe database and memory would provide value in your environment against your existing workload. It uses AWR and Ash data. We've talked about that, the documentation, and of course, all of our other collateral that describes how database and memory works and how you can make use of it. So with that, I think we'll dispense there and we'll get started. Again, I will keep an eye out for Roger. He may have had trouble. It's the first session he's done with us, so he may be having trouble connecting, but we'll see. We'll continue on. So again, welcome. So let's, and my email address is there, and you can follow me on Twitter, Roger's email. Roger actually does quite a few user group sessions as well. So you may have seen him do that, or maybe familiar with him in his, he does Twitter, he's on Twitter, and had his own blog, which we've kind of resurrected within the database and memory blog. There's been some changes with blogging at Oracle, and I think he, some of his blogs or his session or the area he had has disappeared. But with that, we'll go ahead and get started. And let me go ahead and feel free. I will try to do dual duty, and feel free to put questions in the chat. I may only handle those questions at certain times, and since I'm trying to do two things at once. And let's go ahead, whoops, go ahead and get started. We did do a previous AskTOM session on 21C new features where I did touch upon external tables. We're going to go into a little more depth today. And then, well, looks like maybe I didn't get, oh yeah, and then Roger did a blog post on 18C with in-memory external tables. Looks like I might not have put the title there. Sorry about that. And then our 21C blog post that talks about, that I did, that talks about partitioned table support and hybrid partition support, or hybrid table support. And then of course we have the in-memory guide, the documentation for all of the releases. And again, well, we'll just continue on because I have and so we introduced the support for external tables in 18C, Oracle Database 18C, but that only allowed you to define a standard external table within database and memory. The advantage, of course, is that you don't have to materialize the table first in Oracle Database. You can directly populate an external table from external files right into the column store. So that was something that folks have been asking for. The advantage is that you can then operate on that data along perhaps with internal data with all of Oracle's rich SQL functionality and maybe other applications. So it was something that folks had been asking for, and then that we were able to get into, starting with 18C, get into the product. And then in 21C, we introduced an enhancement. We added partition tables because folks really wanted to have the ability to have partitioned external tables. And then we also support hybrid external tables, which had first been introduced in 19C, which allows, you don't know what hybrid external table is, allows you to have a mixture of external partitions and internal partitions. And we'll kind of show you that as well. So that was kind of exciting. If anybody's going to ask, that's at this point, there are no plans to backport that support to 19C. We kind of opened the floodgates with requests for backporting. We did the base level feature, and we've relaxed some of our licensing restrictions. But at this point, it doesn't look, I don't think there's any movement on trying to backport this support. So this is a 21C feature, but we'll be going forward, obviously. And so my first example, I'm going to show you, because I think it's easier to see on the slide, the table syntax that I use. I've already created the tables, and I've already populated for the internal partitions on the hybrid partition table or hybrid external table. I always want to say hybrid partition table, but the tables, so that we don't have to go through the effort of trying to create that and load up the examples. So we'll be ready to roll, but as a review, so this will be a definition of, in this case that we're using, an external table. I call it ext cust. So not particularly imaginative, but external table based on the customer data. To be honest, I don't remember whether I don't think I used the line order or the SSB schema. I think they used one of the examples from the Oracle examples distribution on GitHub, so I think I got the data. Not that that's unimportant, because you have the layout there, and it just goes to a file on my VirtualBox. Very simple. And then the partition external table example that I'm using. Actually, I noticed that it has 5 partitions, and notice the location and a comma separated value CSV file for each of the 5 partitions. It's the same basic data though, the same table and column values. And then we have our hybrid partition table example, where it's again the same columns. And notice that I've got only 4 partitions, but mainly because I have 2 that are external. So we still have 2 externals. Then I have 2 internals. And so that's the hybrid nature. Again, this was introduced in Oracle Database in 19C, but support for within database and memory is a 21C feature. So those are going to be the examples that we're going to take a look at. And then a little housekeeping. Let me double check, see if perhaps Roger connected and is banging his head because he can't get in. I don't see him there. Okay. So a little bit of housekeeping. So the directory, basically I've created a directory. So I said external dir, and it just uses a files directory on my VirtualBox. So you create a directory. Notice that for a hybrid partition table, even though it's supported in 19C, with database and memory, you'll get an error that says, or actually, I'm sorry, this was an example just to show that you have to be on 19C with hybrid partition tables. And then the in-memory part was introduced in 21C. Since I got that error initially when I was experimenting, I thought I'd throw it in there so to show you that you would see that it is starting as a 19C feature, and then again 21C. For in-memory external tables, though, the other thing I wanted to bring up is that you have to set query rewrite integrity to stale tolerated. And Roger talks about this in the 18C blog post, and it is in the documentation. But the gist of that is that since we can't check, in other words, database and memory isn't going to go constantly checking external files. We have to tell the Oracle database to allow stale tolerated, and then you have to manually populate or repopulate the external table data. We won't do that automatically like we do in column store with internal tables. In other words, if you do DML on a normal table that's populated in column store, we'll keep that transactionally consistent and in sync with the row-based data. We've talked about this before because DML always occurs at the row level. But with external tables, we're on a different, it's different. It's a different environment. So you do have to set query rewrite integrity to stale tolerated, and then you have to populate the data explicitly. And so we'll talk about that. I'll show you that. The other, it's not really a wrinkle, I guess, but it's a part of Oracle database, not really database in memory. But as we look at this, you'll notice that I'm going to look at two different views. So the data dictionary view for user tab partitions would be internal partitions, and the external partitions show up there, but as I'll show you, some of the information that we're interested in only show up in user external tab partitions. So you have to have basically access, if you're mixing and matching, to both these views, and I'll show you the SQL that I use for that as part of the demonstration. Oops. A few messages are flying by, so let me go take a look at what's going on here. Oh, I think Roger's here. Roger, welcome.
I apologize. I was buried in trying to solve a problem.
I mean, real work. Well, this is real work too, but development work. So Roger, so I'm sorry, let's back up for a second. So Roger MacNicol has joined us. Do you have access to a camera so people can see you?
Yes, of course. I was waiting to see if you wanted it on.
Yeah, that'd be great. So there he is. And he's one of our, I think, architect is your title, correct?
Yes, it is.
Yes, so he's one of our database and memory developers, and obviously he's been one of the key developers for external tables, which is why I thought it would be cool to get his insights into external tables. So yeah, welcome. And I think I had one question. Is there a sample init.aura parameter for in-memory setup? It's basically the only init.aura parameter you need is in-memory _ size. We have that documented both in the documentation and some of our presentations, even our AskTOM presentations. If you want to go back and take a look at it, I will try to remember to show the in-memory parameters that I have set up in my database environment as part of that.
The only thing that should be needed is to set in-memory size to at least 100 megabytes, which is a bare minimum.
And then for external tables, I don't know if you saw that, but let's see if I can go backwards. I never do that well. So, and then we talked about query rewrite integrity, stale tolerated. So
yeah.
And then we were into the cautions, and so I know you probably want to jump in here, maybe, but
yeah, we've had. Basically, because with external tables, we have no control over what you put in those files. We don't run any validation on them. We trust you. We have had at least one case where somebody filed a wrong results bug because they had not put the partition data in the right flat files. So the partition key excluded that data from being seen. I think on one of my blog articles, I actually give you a query that uses a largely undocumented capability to tell you if you have any rows in the wrong partition. But I mean, it's the same with data types and the number of columns, everything. It's just we have to trust you. We also, I don't know if you talk about stale tolerated, we have no reliable way to detect modification time on any arbitrary data source that somebody may be using. So we don't even attempt to see if you swap out the flat file, which is why stale tolerated is needed to tell us that you understand that this data may be stale. The benefit of this is if you have an external process that is, say, for example, regenerating the flat file once a day based on some other series of ETL tools or business processes, the the ability to use the stale tolerated means it's entirely up to you to schedule a time when you want to do the repopulate to see the new flat file. So that can actually be tied into whatever job is generating the new flat file, so that when it finishes, it can then automatically kick off the repopulate if that is the most appropriate time to remove the in-memory image and replace it.
Yes, I was going to highlight that here, but it's in the bullet, the second bullet about DBMS in-memory populate or repopulate. I kind of mentioned that a little bit earlier, Roger, but the fact that you actually have to take responsibility for populating or repopulating the external table or partitions. So,
yeah.
And then so I always want to highlight with my mouse, and then since I do this in presentation mode to get a bigger screen, it always goes forward on me. So external table demos. So let's go ahead. I've got slides here. I will post the slides PDF format as I have before on the GitHub link that I have in the resources page. So I'm just going to go fly and buy this stuff because we're going to, assuming that my demo continues to work in my VirtualBox, we'll do it that way. And then we'll end up here on I mentioned our resources page earlier when I was doing the introduction, and all of the things that you need, you can find there, links to Live Labs environment, GitHub to get data sets, the slides from the AskTOM sessions I put out there. So anyways, we have that available.
And may I just add that I'm on Twitter?
Yes, I did mention that, but yeah,
okay.
that's
I regularly check to see if customers have questions.
I don't think I had your Twitter handle there, so I guess you just search for Roger MacNicol.
Yeah, it's just literally at Roger MacNicol.
Yeah, so, but yeah, Roger's there, and I did mention also that you do quite a few user conferences, so folks may already actually know you, but or have heard you. So let's see. I'm going to share my entire screen this time around, which is always dangerous, but because I'm going to flip between, actually, maybe I can just do VirtualBox. We'll see how this goes, so it doesn't annoy people. So is that visible there? Is that a big enough screen?
I can see it.
You can see that? Okay. We'll assume that's true. So I already connected. Actually, this is a 21.4 environment that I'm using on my VirtualBox, just the Linux running, and I have the tables already built, as I mentioned. You can ignore the Bulgaria and Norway tables. I used those to populate the internal partitions, and I'll show it to you. But so the tables are not issue. But the point being that I've already pre-built the table, so we didn't have to go through that, and they all have the same format, which I'll just do a describe. Whoops, it would be nice if that so we can see it. And I won't have to freehand type the rest because I've got all that. But that's just the same thing I showed you in the slides. And the external cus table, which is a standard external table, and then the partition and hybrid will flow from the same basic format and data. So with that, let's go ahead and so we've connected. We're gonna so we've got that. And did I don't know if I did an alter. So I'm just gonna actually do our alter session so in case I forget. So we got that there. And then let's go ahead and actually currently in the column store, nothing's populated. So let's go ahead and alter the table to be in memory and populate it. And notice that I'm going to populate it with the dbms in memory.populate command, since it is an external table. And then now we got to go back to a wider screen. Sorry about that. I don't think I have that in my IMSeg. There we go. So and it's small, so it populates like almost immediately. And notice that I've added, and I'll just show you the query. So notice I've added another attribute. There are lots of attributes to these $B tables. So is external, so that we can see that in this case, it is an external table. So that's one way you can know that for tables that are populated, you could have maybe some are external and some are internal. And probably most of them would be internal, but when you have external, I want to say objects, but tables, partitions populated, you can tell or distinguish that they're external if you want to expose that attribute. Okay, I was just looking to see if we have any other questions. So let's actually run a query against this. And again, this was introduced in 18C, so this is just a standard external table. And so, whoops, there we go. So I do this so I don't have to worry about typing. So all I've done is a very simple query. It's the same one I used in the blog post that I did describing a lot of this. And it's the same query we're going to do other than changing the table name. All through the demonstration, very simple. Notice that we picked up 5 nations, which flow with what we're going to do within the partitioning scheme, but suffice it to say, there are 5 nations within the data set for the external table, and a count of them. And then the interesting part is notice that it's external table access in memory full, rather than just table access in memory full. And then, but it's the same display of the execution plan. There's nothing secret about that. And then we see statistics, same kind of statistics, because once the table is populated, then it's just an in-memory table. And so we see all the same processing that we would see otherwise, as far as statistics and scanning rows, and how many IMCUs are populated. And if you want to jump in and correct me on anything, feel free, Roger. So then that's the simple case, basically, is just a standard external table. Okay, got a nod there, so I guess we're good.
Yeah, that's good.
All right, so then let's try and take a look at, so remember I had, I'll just scroll back. Remember, I mentioned that we have multiple tables, so then we're going to go ahead and take a look at just a partition table with internal partitions, and then we'll venture into the hybrid partition table. So external cust part will be the external partition table, and then external cust hybrid part will be the third one we'll take a look at and see how that works. So the syntax is a little bit different as far as generating the table, which I showed you in the slide, in the sense that you have to identify the partitions and then the external files associated with those partitions. And then if we want to take a look at what we've got as far as definition of the partition table. Now notice what I did is I ran a query against user tab partitions with the external custom. We see that we have for the table our 5 partitions, not named particularly adventurously, but and then our value basically for each on the partition key, and then the partition position. Notice the in-memory column is blank. And so let's take a look at, so I'm going to reconnect only because it'll reset our session stats. Not that it's all that important, but just for completeness. And let's go ahead and alter table in memory and populate this one. And then we'll rerun up and we can IMSeg. So again, populates very quickly. Notice that we have still external tables true, and bytes not populated is 0. So we know that we've fully populated the external table, the external cust part with its 5 partitions. And I've added as well the partition name attribute, so we can see the differentiate between the different partitions. And then let's take a look now at what user tab partition, since we enabled for in memory the partition, the table with the partitions. Oh, and it doesn't show up there.
Let me explain.
Okay. I'm going to show you the next one, the reason, but yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, it's worth explaining this. There is we don't put any external table information in tab $, which is the underlying table for heap tables. So we have it, there's a separate X tab that has all of the metadata for external tables. And we have a rule that none of the metadata from external tab $, can show in queries on tab $, so you have to use the two external table specific data catalog views in order to see the external memory attributes such as in memory.
Right, which is why I made a big deal of that in the blog post. I actually mentioned it in the housekeeping slide, but it can be confusing. And notice that now we're querying, actually both, I've combined the data, but the user external tab partitions view is where we're going to pick up then the in-memory information that is enabled. It is, I think, somewhat confusing if you're not paying attention, I guess, or if you're not familiar with how external table, because already you have the same issue with user tables and user tab partitions, where there's differences in what's exposed. And then this continues with external tables and external table partitions as well. And so you have to kind of navigate the different data dictionary views, which is why I made a big deal of it in, again, the blog post, and why I'm showing how to figure this stuff out here so that it's maybe you don't have to reinvent the wheel to do this. So anyway, so we can see that we did indeed enable our the partitions. And so that's where because you don't have to have all of the partitions enabled. You can selectively enable or disable partitions since we do support populating table level, partition level, sub-partitions, which aren't supported with external tables, but are with internal tables, and then materialized views as well. But that is interesting to note that the reasoning behind the decisions of why the different views exist and what's going on there. So thank you, Roger. So let's take a look at the query now. Let's see what we see with, so now we're going to run our same query against the external cust part table. And hopefully it'll be a slightly more interesting, which I think it will be. But notice then we've got our same results, but we have queried the partition version of that table. And now what we see is partition list all and external table access in memory full. And notice that it's included partition stop, start and stop. So we know we've actually accessed the 5 partitions as part of creating or running the query. So it does show up in the execution plan and is exposed there, like all the other kind of in-memory. So we're, database in memory, since it's fully integrated in Oracle database, it's just Oracle database that you're using. All of the same features or utilities that you might have used without in-memory enabled work with in-memory enabled. Execution plans, which we've talked about in the past, statistics, which we've again also talked about in the past. As for completeness sake, I kind of want to point out how all that works. If you have anything to add to that, Roger, feel free. Okay.
Not at this point.
All right, so that's just all internal partition, they're external partitions, but they're all populated. Now we're going to do a little mixing and matching. So we had our, as I mentioned before, our external cust hybrid part table. And what I had done is I showed you on the, I'm not going to try to switch displays, but on the slide, we'll actually have 4 partitions. 2 are defined as external with CSV files, and then 2 are internal. And I'll show you the information, but the bottom line is that was what those external, well, I guess we go back at least for this. Sometimes I think people get dizzy when I do this, but maybe, okay. Right here. And this is the reason that I created the the Bulgaria and the Norway table is because I then used the data from these two tables as the internal, to make the internal partitions for the hybrid partition table. So 2 are external, 2 are internal, and in all full disclosure. And so let's take a look at what we've got. Scroll back down. Again, I scripted all of this so that you wouldn't have to watch me fumble with typing. That's never a lot of fun. We'll go ahead and reconnect, reset our session parameter. And take a look at what we've got. So what we see now is our external cust hybrid partition table, our 4 partitions, the high values. Notice Bulgaria and Norway are 3 and 4. And I included 2 externals, again, 2 internals. Notice that we see disabled on this query because these 2 are internal. So they show up in user tab partitions, as what Roger mentioned, the differentiation. And then if we take a look at my combined query that combines both the external table view and internal table view. And this is kind of the one I've been using. And again, this file, I'll make the text file available. So if you want to cut and paste it off of GitHub rather than trying to write out any of this on your own, that's for you to be able to do that. Notice with the external table for the external tab partitions view, external tab partitions, then we can see that the in-memory status for external tables combined with the in-memory status for internal tables. And this becomes of interest with the hybrid partition table since we're combining both external and internal partitions together. And then we'll show you some population in a second. We good? Okay. So let's see, let's take and I'm not going to populate yet on purpose. So we're going to just go ahead and we'll run our same query. Whoops. You know, every once in a while, I miss the execution plan gets missed on the query. So our same query, but of course with hybrid partition table, are 4 partitions. And now we see a little bit different execution plan. Notice Oracle is going to tell us that we have a hybrid partitioned access. And 1 through 4, because there are 4, we're accessing all of them. There's no where clause predicate to exclude any of the data. And so we're going to see, but we are going to see that we're doing a hybrid access of rather than a standard external table access. The same is true for some of the other features in 21C. One I'm thinking of is when we have columns that aren't all fully populated and we do a hybrid query to access those columns that are in the row store. And so we make a differentiation there. Again, trying to make this so that it's at least a little bit more clear for customers when you're running your queries to see where we're accessing the data. And then of course, since we're not populated in the column store, we don't see any in-memory statistics. We just see normal row store session logical reads since the data is populated in the buffer cache. And so there you go. So let's go ahead now and I'll go ahead and reconnect. We'll alter the table to be in memory and we'll populate it all in one set of commands. So I just reconnected, again, so we can do the query of external tables, our stale tolerated value for query rewrite. I've taken and altered the table to be in memory, this what we do with all normal in-memory commands. And then of course, it won't automatically populate. So we you invoke dbIMP's in-memory populate for that table to populate it. And then with any luck, it is populated. And I didn't remove any of the other tables. I have enough room in my column store. So what we're working with right now are these guys. So notice that the external is true for 2 of them and false for 2 of them. So 2 of the table or partitions are internal partitions and 2 are external partitions, hence the hybrid partition table designation. And then we also want to take a look at our query of the 2 views, see that we can then differentiate why is that set? Oh, because I did the whole table, sorry. I was thinking, actually I'd have to back up because I think I mentioned here that all 4 are populated. I was thinking ahead, got a little confused there. We're actually gonna not populate all 4. In this case, all 4 are populated. I got mixed up in my demos there, and we can see that they're all enabled for in-memory. And we can also, if we wanted to, do our second query version, so we can see that in the first one, I just combined the 2. In this one, I can differentiate user tab partitions versus external tab partitions. I like this query better just because it allows me to know what's external, what's internal. And then I'll go ahead and run our query based on basically everything being populated. And so here we see table access hybrid part in-memory full, whereas before we saw table access hybrid part full. So the in-memory designation tells us we went in-memory. We see our in-memory statistics there. So we've accessed at least 2 of the partitions in memory and 2 of the partitions not in memory, hence the table access in memory full and table access hybrid in memory full. Although the partitions stop and start, I would have expected it to be something like 1 and 2 or 1 and 3 and 2 and 4, but I guess it just doesn't work that way. We have seen a couple of differences in execution plans, and we actually discovered a bug that we're getting fixed. So I don't know if that has anything to do with that. You know, is this the expected execution plan, Roger, that you would look at, or is there something we could maybe make that a little more clear?
No, that's what I expect to see.
Okay.
It only gets complicated when you have some partitions in and some partitions out.
Well, let's make it complicated then. That's the next. That's the next one. So let's go ahead. So let's go ahead. I'm going to go ahead and reconnect one more time. Again, the only reason I'm reconnecting is just to zero out the session level statistics. This is a typical thing we do with all of our all of the demonstrations and the live labs and hands-on labs, just because it's nice to see just for the query we ran, because these will accumulate across the session if you don't reconnect. So now what we're going to do is I'm going to actually explicitly alter the table to be no in memory. I'll go over this in a second. So I'm going to alter the table to be no in memory, and then I'm going to explicitly alter 2 of the partitions, one external, one internal, to be in memory, and then we're going to go ahead and populate those 2 to be in memory. So I'm doing this at now the partition level as opposed to the table level. And then let's go see what we've got here. So now we see, and this is just to remember, this is my, I'm not differentiating external and internal per se. I'm combining, basically doing a join on the 2, so that we see that now our N1 is enabled and our N3 is enabled, but 2 and 4 are disabled. So now we got the mixture. So we have not only hybrid partition table with 2 internal and 2 external partitions, but then we also have them further segregated where we have one of the two is enabled for in-memory on each of the external and internal. So now we're mixing and matching all of this. And if we look at our IM seg to see what's actually populated, we now see that just those two partitions are populated in the column store. Notice our external flag, one being in memory or external and one being internal. And then finally, what is this going to look like at the execution layer? So we've got our select statement, and our execution plan now has hybrid part in memory full and table access in memory full against our external table, our hybrid partition table, and our partitions 1 through 4. And we've run it. I'm going to run that one more time. Yep. And this is one of the bugs, which we bugged and will get fixed. So notice we're only seeing 3 of the partitions being accessed. And unfortunately, this one slipped through, so it will get fixed. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. It's intermittent, and I discovered this during the session. Full disclosure, we've bugged it. The developers discovered where the problem is, and we'll get it fixed and patched.
I mean, the fix is already underway, so if anybody needs it, it shouldn't be long before you can request a patch.
Yeah. And that's the nature of software. Bugs do occur. But
try not to.
What's that? I'm sorry.
We try not to.
No, I know we do, but it does sometimes happen. So, but I wanted to basically show how all this worked, and so hopefully that's clear. We've run. Wow, this always happens. We've run 45 minutes. We do have a full hour though. So what I wanted to do is see if there are questions either about this or anything else. Looks like, oh, you're famous.
One thing on
you
hybrid.
made anything you want. Yes.
So a performance tip. If you find that you're mixing external partitions in memory and not in memory, there will be a huge performance difference between them. And usually any flat file generated by an external process is going to be in Oracle loader format. Oracle loader format is inherently slow because it is doing ASCII data to Oracle internal data types on numbers and date times, for example. So the trick there is if you're going to be querying those flat files regularly, I don't know if people have noticed, you can actually use CTAS, create table as select, where the select is reading Oracle loader format, but the create table is in Oracle data pump format. So if you run that as a CTAS, you can convert your Oracle loader flat file very quickly to an Oracle data pump flat file. Data pump flat files are already in Oracle internal data type format, and the path for reading them is enormously clearer, simpler, and faster. It's been heavily columnarized. It's had a lot of performance optimizations done in it. So I would, anytime if you have flat files that you need to query more than a few times, please consider moving them into data pump format for those queries.
So I brought this up because this was a definition. I think it's a little easier to see. So you're referring to is this section in here, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. So Oracle Loader is going to be much slower than Data Pump.
Yep.
And I guess that's worth mentioning because I think I had it in the slide up here. We've also done work where we've added, is it in this one or is it? Because we did talk about it, where we've added other support as well, right? Because we have Oracle yes. Loader, Data Pump, Hive, and HDFS, correct?
Yeah, so Hive is the one we've put the most work into, and it's certainly the one that customers have most significantly asked for. And Hive offers us a big advantage over HDFS simply because the Hive catalog is directly readable by Oracle. So if you point us towards a table in Hive, Oracle can read the metadata in, suck it, create the Oracle representation for that data, and access it with much less work for you to do than you'd have with, for example, Oracle Loader.
Excellent. It's too bad we can't get some of that information that you guys have into the documentation, but we never seem to get to that level in the docs. But that's actually a very nice tidbit to know about how that works under the covers. So thank you. That's great. I don't know if we have any other questions. We'll wait a few minutes. I do want to reiterate that we do have our blog and resources page. I will, on the resources page, the GitHub link is there where I've been keeping or adding now AskTOM. I'll put the presentation and I'll put the text file of what we ran. So if you want to grab the SQL statements, not that they're anything magical, but may save you some time if you want to experiment with this. You can experiment with this on your environments with the base level feature enabled. You can certainly do a VirtualBox and download something like Developer Days if you want to try to experiment with that. I'm pretty sure Developer Days is now 21C. I'm not positive of that. And unfortunately, Live Labs is not yet 21C. It's still 19C. So you can't experiment in Live Labs with that per se. But it's relatively, and actually you can use probably the latest XE version if you want to download the RPM for that. That's probably maybe an even simpler way. But there are methods to get an environment, 21C environment. If you want to experiment, then I'll have the SQL there if you want to kind of fool around and see how this works. Maybe this makes sense for something that you're doing or planning on doing. I know 19C is our long-term release, and this is 21C's interim release, but we will be moving eventually to 23C, I think is going to be the next long-term release, assuming that it is, or whatever it is. All of this obviously gets carried forward, so you can certainly make use of it. But external tables themselves have been supported since 18C, so you can do that in 19C as well. So, and with that, I don't see any, there's a question. So the question is, what are the data types supported by external tables? For example, blob, clob, maybe a typo there, supported. There are restrictions. They are documented. Do you remember off the top of your head, Roger? I think I have it in the blog.
I have to look them up every time for the lengths that we're willing to import.
Yeah. So the answer to your question is it's in the documentation, and I believe I put it actually also on the blog post of some of the restrictions. So we do document the restrictions on data types. I don't remember them off the top of my head. I apologize.
It's more to do with size restrictions, I think people run into with blobs than with the data type issues.
I don't see any other questions. We're about 10 minutes. Anything else that you wanted to mention?
Yeah, I made a note of something that I need to investigate, and then I will tweet the answer to. Some customers may not be happy setting query rewrite integrity equals stale tolerated, because they may not want their materialized views to be read under those circumstances. To which the current option is to simply do an alter session around, whatever script or process the query is embedded in. So one of the things that I need to look up, not all of our parameters have been connected to the opt param hint. I need to investigate whether query rewrite integrity is available under opt param, in which case you could leave query rewrite set strictly and just put the hint directly in the queries against.
Right, so you could desegregate it just to the query. That would be a great, that'd be very interesting. And if it's not available, maybe if it's not too difficult. If it's not
available, I will immediately file a bug to fix it, Andy, yes.
Awesome, great. That's right.
Before my PM asks me to do it.
Great. Okay. Well, I don't see any other questions, so I guess we'll give you a few minutes of your time back. But one more. Do you have some practices for analytical views? Analytic views. We do. Bud gosh, I'm blanking on Bud's last name. Sorry. He wrote the in-memory aggregation white paper. And I know he has some presentations. We could, I will try to, if you can either email me or I will see if I can get maybe Bud to write a blog post about analytic views, because analytic views have been Bud Andres. Yes, thank you. Sorry. If Bud's there, I apologize for forgetting his last name. But I don't know that there are some best practices that he's done some presentations. I'll see what I can do of see if I can get some of those posted, because I have seen them, and analytic views are excellent for, for people who are not necessarily familiar. I don't remember when they were introduced, maybe 12.2, but they give you the ability to define hierarchies so the optimizer can more efficiently access the data. And so in combination with database and memory, makes an excellent substitution, or I don't know if I want to say substitution, for OLAP type queries and multidimensional queries. So I will take that and see if we can get something posted for you. If you want, again, you can always email me directly as well. Sure, you're welcome. Anything else? Doesn't look like it. I want to thank all of you for attending, and we will get this posted, recorded, and posted on the AskTOM site. Again, I will post the presentation PDF and text file of the commands that were run on GitHub. And we will, I'm not sure what we're going to do. My goal is to do something as a follow-up to in-memory aggregation and the vector group by sessions next. But that hasn't been formally decided, as I'm trying to get a guest to help me with that. And we have one more question, since we have time.
I was going to say, the last question is on IAM Advisor, and I need to forward that to the engineer who owns IAM Advisor. So I'm scared to pronounce your first name in case I accidentally mispronounce it. But please, would you email me or email Andy, and I will make sure your question gets to the engineer who owns it, and that you get a meaningful and adequate response to your question.
So the question was that IAM Advisor waiting for SQL statements includes group by clause. Otherwise, it triggers error and not generating an output. Will this be improved in the future? And we actually are. Our group now owns the in-memory advisor, so we are working on enhancements. We want to include it in the database, and we want to make it even more user-friendly. So as Roger said, he'll take that up with the developer working on that. And just so you guys know, we are actually working. We think the in-memory advisor is key to helping folks decide, is in-memory going to provide benefits? And so we are actively working on a next version of the in-memory advisor and updating what we have. And so, so we can take that under advisement. And with that, I think we'll go ahead, unless somebody pops in with something, we'll go ahead and sign off. And again, thank you for attending. Roger, thank you for showing up and being a guest. I know you got stuck with something else, and that's not. Yeah. I'm glad you didn't just blow us off, and because I think it was very useful having some of your comments. And thank you everybody for attending, and we will see you next time.